بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا إنك سميع مجيب الدعاء. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع وقلب لا يخشع ونفس لا تشبع ودعاء لا يسمع. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum everyone and welcome. Jazakumullah khair for joining us. It's Tuesday evening. It's 7 o'clock in St. Louis time, 5 o'clock California time, and wherever you are joining us from, Jazakumullah khair for joining us. Will be really nice to know where are you joining us from. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all in this day and age and in this beginning of a new year. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lift the test, Ya Rabbi Ameen. Again, the world is going through another surge of the COVID and a lot of people are getting sick. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi Ameen, nas'aluka bi kulli ismin huwa lak. We ask, Ya Allah, with every name that is yours, that Ya Allah remove this test from all of us and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive all our sins, Ya Rabbi Ameen, and make this as a mean to elevate our status and not a punishment for us and for those especially. We pray that everybody who's getting sick, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them with full shifa and recovery, Ya Rabbi Ameen. So Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, we are today, it's a pleasure again to welcome my dear friend and our dear Sheikha, and she's also our guest instructor at Jannah Institute, Sheikha Zaynab Ansari, joining us from Tennessee. Sheikha Zaynab, as always, lovely to see you, and it's a pleasure to have you with us again. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala join us always in everything that pleases him, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower all of us, Ya Rabbi Ameen, with health and his pleasure. So Sheikha Zaynab, inshallah, one of the main challenges that we as Muslim families these days, and anyone who has children, whether they are now growing up or they already grown up, you probably will agree with this statement, is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ. For sure your children and wealth is a test. And raising children, especially in this day and age, and especially in the Western world, anything to say short of a challenge and a test is probably understatement. And however, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of his rahmah, always help us and send us means and ways, and he makes things easy. So I will leave this to Sheikh Zaynab to share with us the gems that she always does. And what you want to share with us, Ya Sheikh Zaynab, today about teens. What's their responsibility? Are they responsible? What's the responsibility of the parents? So I will leave it to you, Ya Sheikh Zaynab. Can't hear you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. Sheikha Haifaa, so happy to see you and to join you on this Tuesday night for the special program, and warm welcome to our dear sisters and audience members who are gathered here. So I hope that picture and sound are okay. Yes. I actually have some slides I prepared. They seem to have actually shown up here, so if I can figure out how to do this, inshallah. Are we? Okay, there we are. So this is our topic for tonight, in the shade of Allah Ta'ala, teens and Islam. So for those of you who are accustomed to my teaching style, you know that I follow the inquiry kind of method of teaching, which is I always like to start off with posing a question. So I'll begin properly. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And that in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa ala sallam kathira. Ameen. So is everyone able to hear me? I feel like my picture and sound are slowing or speeding or not sure what's going on. So
it's perfect, Ya Sheikh. Alhamdulillah.
Okay, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Very good. So, as always, we ask Allah Ta'ala for openings, for blessings, and we begin with the name of Allah Ta'ala, who's always gracious and merciful, and praising Allah Ta'ala amidst all our circumstances, and asking Allah Ta'ala to send blessings and peace upon Prophet Muhammad and his companions. Ameen Ya Rab. So this is really the question that I wanted to explore for tonight. And it ties into the parenting class. So I'm really excited about the parenting class, which is starting, inshallah, in about 10 days or so. And as part of what we'll be discussing for the parenting class, the idea is parenting with purpose. That kullukum ra'in, like that every one of you is a shepherd, and every one of you is responsible for his or her flock. So that really is the hadith that's kind of underpinning the class. And the idea behind parenting with purpose, we're going to explore more, inshallah ta'ala, over the next 4 weeks. But in terms of tonight's topic and how it's related to the idea of parenting with purpose, I wanted to kind of delve into this question of teens and addressing the kind of specific needs of teens. And it's an interesting question to me because I'm raising teens. So I've got 3 children, and please make dua for them, and may Allah always preserve our children. So my 3 children are 2 of them are teens, and 1 is about to become a teen. So it's a really interesting question to me, obviously from the standpoint of being a mom, but also from the standpoint of teaching Islamic law. I've been kind of thinking about issues of taklif. So I'm going to kind of back up a little bit and share with you why this is kind of an interesting idea or question to me. It's because I'm the child of converts, and one of the things that was really interesting kind of growing up is that there wasn't a lot of literature that addressed parenting from an Islamic standpoint. So one of the ideas that my parents encountered when they were raising me and my sister in the 1980s and 1990s, and as we kind of became teens in the 1990s, was this idea of adolescence, i.e. of being a teenager, and this idea of taklif, which I'll define in just a moment, and if Islamic law has sort of space for this concept of being a teen. And what was really interesting was that at the time in the 1990s, this idea that became really kind of prevalent was that no, if you look at Islamic, you're going to see that in terms of how Islamic law addresses legal responsibility, which is what taklif means, you go from being a child to being an adult, and there's really kind of no intervening phase of development between those 2 stages. So that is the experience that's informed the question that I'm posing tonight. And again, while it might seem like an odd question to some of you, it's actually something that's quite relevant because, again, for a lot of us as Muslims in the West, when we are looking for guidance and advice on how to really address any range of issues, whether it's relating to marriage or family or parenting or what have you, we are going to, I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10, we are going to refer to books of fiqh or jurisprudence, Islamic law. And that's where you're going to see, for example, in discussions of religious obligations, such as prayer, for example, or fasting, we're going to see that the jurists, the fuqaha, are going to address, sometimes directly, sometimes tangentially, they're going to address this issue of going from childhood to quote-unquote adulthood, when one goes from being a child to being a mukallaf or legally responsible individual. So, again, in kind of a cursory reading of those texts, you can't blame people, if we look at those texts and come away with the understanding that there is no intervening period of development called the teenage years. So that's the question for tonight, Sheikh. I just wanted to present that.
Okay.
Inshallah. So just let me know, inshallah, if I should continue.
Yes, please.
Okay, very good. So I have in the slides, and by the way, this is a 4-week parenting course, Parenting with Purpose. We're going to be looking at the hadith of guardianship, looking at different developmental stages, inshallah, of child development. We'll be looking at this idea of creating a philosophy of parenting and making sure that is rooted in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So that's the plan for the next 4 weeks. But as I was thinking about tonight's topic and this idea of the teen, I said, is it true? Is it correct that we go to books of jurisprudence and draw the conclusion that you go from being a child to an adult, and there's no recognition by those pre-modern or scholars of the classical era, that there's no recognition of kind of youth or being a teenager. And then I said, let me actually go back and look at those texts. And even kind of beyond that, let me actually go back and look at various ayahs in the Quran. Let me look at prophetic hadith. And let's actually kind of look at how this issue of youth is addressed. So thinking about tonight's topic, Sheikha Haifaa and all of the sisters here in the audience, I was really intrigued with this particular hadith that I want to share. So I've got both the Arabic and the English here. The Arabic, sorry, the text might be a little bit garbled there. That's a citation at the bottom. But as you can see, you can actually find this in Bukhari and Muslim. So here's our hadith. So anhu reported the Prophet ﷺ said, there are 7 people whom Allah will shade on a day when there is no shade but His. So toggling back and forth, I want you to see the Arabic because it's really beautiful. سَبْعَةٌ يُظِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي ظِلِّهِ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ. So now your 7 categories. Number 1 is your just leader, al-imam al-adil. And then number 2, it's really interesting. It goes from the just leader to this idea of, look at the term shab nasha'a bi'ibadatillah. And to me, this is really intriguing because now we get mention of this kind of period of development where a person's referred to as being shab. And this to me is, again, it's very intriguing because it is a hadith, it's texts like these that support the idea that even, obviously 14 centuries ago, there is recognition that there is this period of intellectual, cognitive, moral, and physical development that intervenes sometime between childhood and adulthood. And here, the Prophet, peace be upon him, is referring to this as that period when someone is shab. So we have the idea of the youth that grew, that is nasha'a, and nasha'a is an interesting term because nasha'a means to be raised up, to be inculcated, that this is the basis of tarbiyah for this youth. A youth who grew up in the worship of Allah. Then, and I think really each of these categories is actually kind of related because the next category that immediately follows is the idea of the person, وَرَجُلْ قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقْ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. And by the way, let's not make the mistake again of doing a cursory reading, i.e. a very, and what that means is a superficial reading where we think, oh, well, this hadith is not for me as a woman. It has nothing to do with women or young women. No, this hadith addresses, number 1, anybody in a position of leadership. Number 2, this shab is not restricted to obviously male youth, right? Male and female youth, that they are inculcated on the model of this, of a worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the person whose heart is attached to the masajid, and as I hope to address in the 4-week parenting class, I don't think these are separate categories, i.e. that there's something that's being suggested here, that by being kind of connected to the community, to the space of worship, it's going to assist in this effort to bring these children up upon this particular model. So we get the person whose heart is attached to the masajid. Then we get this idea of people that their attachment to each other is solely for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. They love each other, they meet each other and depart from each other on the basis, the sake of Allah Ta'ala. Then this is where the hadith gets a little tricky to read because again, we read it very literally and think, well, how does this apply to me? Well, keep in mind, this is not exclusive in the sense that even though the language says man who is tempted by beautiful of high status, but he rejects her by saying, I fear Allah, the reverse could also apply if it's a woman who has to make this choice between the temptations of the dunya and thinking about Allah Ta'ala. And then the person who is charitable, such that they spend so much that their right hand does not know what the left hand gives. And then finally, the person who remembers Allah Ta'ala in private, which is really key, and that person, their eyes overflow with tears. So again, I'm presenting this hadith because, like I said, if we kind of go beyond these rulings in some of the books of law, we can see there is a recognition time and time again in numerous hadith that there are these different stages of human development. Now, again, if you're wondering about this term taklif, I don't have a slide on that. I'll be kind of working on that, inshallah, for the class I'm teaching. But the term taklif is a masdar. It's a verbal, a gerund or a verbal noun that is usually translated as kind of a legal obligation under the Sharia to enact certain responsibilities that constitute the pillars of Islam, the pillars of worship. And it is sort of entering into this period of taklif that really sort of signals to the community that that person is has now become a mature, a quote unquote mature and responsible adult. Okay, so I want you to understand what does that term mean? And of course, I'm not dismissing it. I'm not saying it doesn't apply. I'm not saying these texts don't apply. Absolutely, they apply. But I want you to understand that the person that's taklif, that has a taklif, or the mukallaf individual, the legally responsible individual, usually in the text is defined in terms of three components. You have to write these down because they're not here in the slides. Those three components are bulugh, and aql, and Islam. All right, or we could start with Islam. Number one, in order for an individual to be considered to be responsible, they have to be Muslim, i.e., that the obligations of prayer and fasting and zakah and pilgrimage, they apply to whom? The Muslim individual, number one. And then number two, the person is baligh. And that's where we kind of fall into that question of, is there actually a teenage person in Islam? Because bulugh, right, or the person who's baligh, or the person who is of age, it means that that person has reached adolescence, that there are certain physical markers of development that have taken place. And, and of course, Sheikha, please feel free to comment, given that you're a physician, mashallah, so, you have insight into these matters. But, in the text, it's usually defined as that for a female, it's the onset of menstruation or menarche. And for the male, it is that person basically they've had a specific type of dream that they're going to see, or they've reached 15 years of age. So again, these are markers of physical development that we see in adolescence. And of course, I could list other signs, but that's not necessarily the topic for tonight. But what I want to emphasize here is just because that young person has reached the age of bulugh, it doesn't mean that cognitively and intellectually they've become adults. And that's a very important distinction. And that's a distinction that we might miss if we don't read these texts, the books of jurisprudence properly. Because keep in mind here that the fuqaha are not arguing that that person that's just become an adolescent is at the same place morally, spiritually, intellectually as the more mature adult. No, they're just saying that from the standpoint of Islamic ritual law, that there is kind of a legal obligation or an expectation now that this person is going to be able to perform certain responsibilities. So, i.e., they're going to be praying or they're going to be fasting. Primarily those two, because of course, Hajj is a different conversation that requires a certain amount of wherewithal and resources. Zakah is having wealth, right? So I want you all to understand where I'm coming from. So again, those are again, this is how we define taklif in terms of, number one, are they Muslim? Number two, have they reached adolescence? And number three, the presence of aql, like an aql that is aql salim, sound intellect. And that's also key. And I want to emphasize this point here because that person's intellectual and cognitive capacity has to be such that they understand what is the rationale behind praying and fasting and carrying out these obligations. So in other words, we can't go and kind of make the same demands of someone, say, who is maybe neurotypical, that, we can't make the same demands, say, of somebody who has a disability, especially an intellectual one. And so this comes to me, this addresses my next point here, which is the idea of understanding that even for teens that don't have an intellectual or cognitive impairment or disability, that there are certain areas of the brain that are still developing. And especially when it comes to, yes.
I love this. I don't think a lot of people have looked at that. Is the question I have for you, as a mother who I have, let's say, or any of the mothers or the parents who are listening to us, who they have a 14 or a 15 or a 12-year, let's say a girl these days, menstruation starts at 9 and 10 years old, literally. I mean, if you go to the 6th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, a good number of the girls are. And for the boys, a lot of them, the physical changes will happen way before 15. Why do I, as a mother, need to know that don't judge them fully as an adult, although there is a taklif or there is a certain ritual requirements have become obligation? What does that help me with?
That's a wonderful question, Sheikha. Absolutely. So, yes. So I'm sorry, the sound was kind of cutting off. So the question is, when that young person reaches adolescence earlier, right? Okay. So absolutely. So it's important to understand that when it comes to menstruation, that, most of the schools of law have established a minimum age. I think it's around 9 years of age, right? At least I know in the Shafi'i school. Yeah. Yes.
Most of them are good at 9.
Right. Absolutely. So obviously that, now if a girl is menstruating before that age, then obviously we want to make sure that concern is addressed from a medical standpoint. Now, I know this is a difficult conversation for moms because, if the girl reaches menstruation, say before that average of, whether it's 11, 12, 13 at age 9, that's a lot, right? You're coming to a 9-year-old, you're saying, okay, 9-year-old under the Sharia, now you have to carry out all these religious obligations. So this is where, and inshallah, I'll be addressing this in my class. So this is, again, where, again, that idea of kind of having a very intentional philosophy of parenting that, where you're going to be kind of acclimating that young person to these obligations. And by the way, there's this idea of the age of tamyiz, which is addressed in these texts, that before you get to adolescence, there is this window between 7 and 9 or 7 and 10 years of age where you're teaching, right? You're not imposing, but you are teaching certain rituals to your children, right? So in other words, they're being acclimated to prayer and they're being acclimated to fasting. And by the way, the texts actually say that if they don't doing certain things, say by age 10, then you can kind of discipline them, all right? So what I want to say here is that and this is my advice, if you have a young girl, because 9 years of age, this is still a young girl, and she's experiencing her first cycle. Now, if our approach to parenting has been all along that she sees the parents praying and fasting, and she has participated in these activities, and she's beginning to kind of form a worldview around what it means to be Muslim, right? It really depends on have we done that or not. Now, if we've kind of established that foundation, then yes. Could you come to her at age 9 and say you should be doing all 5 prayers and fasting? Yes, by the kind of very strict letter of the law, yes, you can do that. However, I also want to caution that compassion is very important here, to understand that every family is different, every household, it has its own particular dynamic. The child has her own kind of personality, and again, if she is not able to overnight carry out those religious obligations, then we have to be able to kind of figure out how to address that in a way that is skillful, in a way that is tactful, in a way that's compassionate. All right. That it's not necessarily that she's going to go from not doing these things to doing these things just because she has her cycle. Now, of course, the older she gets, we definitely want to encourage her to be doing it, kind of participating in these activities of her own volition. But I want you to understand that again, if that foundation is not there, I don't know that we can go and tell that 9-year-old child, okay, you have to behave as if you're an adult, because understand this, she might have her cycle, but developmentally, she is still very much a child. And she actually, since she's a preteen, she actually has not, in many cases, I don't think she's actually entered into that kind of phase of development where she's seeking more autonomy from the parents. She's probably not doing that at 9 years of age. So I hope that helps a little bit, inshallah.
Yes, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. It definitely helped. And this is, if I take this to the next level, and the take home.
All right, Sheikh, it looks like the picture and sound, and I don't know if it's my side or.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what I will the point which is really good that you just made. So the 9-year-old or the 11-year-old boy, or let's say 12-year-old boy, he is not going to be like, let's say Saturday, the girl, right, had no cycle. Next Saturday, she finished her cycle. Now, this week does not make her fully adult, and we expect her to do everything. Meaning that parents needs to start preparing way ahead of that. Because once she becomes mukallaf in the Islamic law, she is supposed to do all these things, but she's not ready. And how we make her or him ready, I think that's something you're going to be covering in the course for sure, right? And that's part of the parenting, because at this point, parents are the one who are responsible. Am I right, Ya Sheikha? Can you hear me? I can't hear you, Ya Sheikha Zaynab. I think we lost her. Let's see if we can get her again. Yep, hopefully. Yes. Now we can hear you, Sheikha Zaynab.
I'm sorry, Sheikh. It seems like my Wi-Fi is just not doing so well tonight. I'm sorry. I think I think the last thing you said was that regarding that young person, that
so like parents, what I was trying to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, parents needs to start getting ready, not at 9. It's like from 7, or especially for the girls, because the girls, now the menstruation is becoming earlier. So by 8, probably by 7, gradually starting preparing this young soul that salah by this time will become obligation, other things will become obligation, because it's not going to happen overnight. She can't change from one person to the other overnight. I think that's the point you're trying to make.
Yes, absolutely. As parents, we have to have, there's a certain level of responsibility. So what I'm saying is that, again, the idea that we just kind of wait for these things to happen and we say, hey, you have to come and do this. No, again, there's so much groundwork you have to establish kind of leading up to that. I actually wanted to mention this. I'll go back to these slides. This point right here, this is the right to the child, kind of a summary of the Muslim child's kind of Bill of Rights that I mentioned last time. Yes. Is, again, as parents being really educated, and, again, I'm not saying we all go out and become experts in child development or study kind of, the psychology of children or, kind of look at neural development. If you can do that, I encourage you to, but not all of us are going to go and do that, right? But to have some sense of these are the different kind of stages of child development, which inshallah, I'm actually going to be looking at as part of our class, kind of what happens, because there are these different stages. There's preconception, then there's the conception and infancy and those early childhood years, and then the age of discernment, then there's the adolescence and so on. So as parents, having some sense of what these stages are like and what to look out for, the needs of the child during that stage and how to really interact with them. And again, making sure that we're establishing a proper foundation of tarbiyah, because like I said, it doesn't, we really cannot expect that overnight the child is going to necessarily be inclined to carry out those responsibilities. Now, of course, I know from a Shari'i standpoint, if the girl has her cycle or the boy has reached that age where he sees a particular kind of dream or he's old enough or what have you, and there are other kind of signs of kind of development that, yes, they are answerable when it comes to obligations like prayer and fasting. But this is where, again, the compassion piece comes in, because kids will actually ask questions. They will push back. They will say, why do I have to do this? I remember having a lengthy conversation with my daughter and some of her classmates about salah and why does God ask us to pray? Why? I mean, it was really quite kind of it became a very kind of philosophical conversation about the sort of purpose behind, why Allah Ta'ala created human beings to begin with. And it was really interesting. And again, these are young people. Can you all see and hear me? These are young people that by and large have gone to Islamic schools, but they're in middle school now. And again, developmentally to understand where they are. By the time they get to middle school, they are beginning to form certain ideas about themselves and their place in the world, their relationship with authority figures, and they're wanting greater autonomy. And there are questions that young people are asking that perhaps young people of a different time or era or culture might not have asked. So that's why, again, I really want to emphasize this idea, of kind of compassion. And I have some ahadith, there are numerous ahadith about this. I like this one right here, the idea of facilitating things for people. And this is from Sayyidina Anas radiallahu anhu, said the Prophet said, make things easy and do not make things difficult. I love this. I mean, it's just so, mashallah. I mean, like from the standpoint of like emotional intelligence and understanding human psychology, it's so on point. Again, the idea of making things easy and do not make things difficult, calming people down, de-escalating, and not inciting people's aversion. And this is so important for us as parents.
So give me an example, Ya Sheikha. I love this hadith. يسروا ولا تعسروا وبشروا ولا تنفروا. Make things easy, give glad tidings. But here you go, if you come to a reality, and I'm speaking on the behalf of the parents listening to us. So I have a 13-year-old who, a boy or a girl, both became an adult. And it is a struggle to ask them to pray, although now it becomes an obligation. So how do I combine this beautiful prophetic way with reality?
Absolutely, Sheikha. And inshallah, let me know if I need to move closer to my router, inshallah. So the question is how to introduce prayer to this young person. So, okay. So one of the things that I like to address is the language that we use. So for example, I've been using the language of obligation all along, right? This idea of taklif, idea of legal responsibility. I've mentioned religious obligations. I've mentioned the idea that, these are things that we have to do once we get to a certain age, accountable under the Sharia. So I think the language is really important. And when I had this conversation with the young lady about prayer, I realized something in the language of obligation that she was reacting to, and it was not a good reaction. So that's why I want you to understand that, yes, technically speaking, when you open up a book of Islamic law or jurisprudence, they're going to say that, prayer is fuddled, fasting is fuddled for this individual under these circumstances, the conditions, etc. And it's legal language. And what I want parents to understand is that the language of legal texts, while it obviously serves a very valuable purpose for those jurists, is not necessarily the same language that we want to, that we're able to successfully translate for our children. And this is where, again, an understanding of where they are kind of developmentally and cognitively, and also understanding the culture is so important. Sheikha, for example, it may be to where in a certain setting, maybe in a different society, different culture, maybe in earlier times, that it would have been sufficient to go to that young person and say, okay, now this, the salah or the fasting has become fuddled, right? This is an obligation. This is the expectation that you are going to carry out these responsibilities, and they're okay with that. But understand that for young people that are brought up in the West, and I know it might sound like, okay, this is not a good thing, but this is the reality. For some of them, there might be an aversion to this idea of an obligation, that this is something kind of being imposed on them. So we have to be careful here. We have to make sure that we strike a balance between conveying, obviously, what are the expectations for that Muslim teen or that young person entering into adolescence, right? I'm saying don't kind of downplay that there is kind of an expectation, there is a requirement, but to also understand that if you are always emphasizing the part of the kind of the fardiyah, this is fard, this is required, this is an obligation, this is a duty, this is something that you have to do, then the piece that we're missing out on is, well, why do we pray? We pray because we are attempting in our very kind of, in our very kind of limited sort of human way, that we are attempting to show some gratitude to Allah Ta'ala for everything that He's given us. Because that's what the young lady is really struggling with. Like, why does God need us to do this to begin with? So for me, Sheikh, it's more of an aqidah than a fiqh issue. And I want to talk about this during our class, i.e. is there a difference between kind of teaching our kids theology and tawheed? If we, from day one, are establishing our young people in a worldview that's rooted in tawheed, then it becomes a lot easier for them to handle the language of obligation. But if we have just given them everything they want from the very beginning, and they are coming up in a culture that's all about what do I want, and let me follow how I'm feeling at this moment, and I'm going to wake up and on any given day and basically follow my hawa, my caprice, my desire, then when you bring them that language of obligation, it becomes very difficult for them.
So what language then we do?
Again, we have to strike a balance, because I'm not saying that we're just going to go and say, hey, okay, pray if you feel like it, fast if you feel like it, if you don't feel like it, it's fine, you can pick and choose. I'm not saying that we want to go in that, kind of extreme, but what I would suggest is that we really need to use language that is very much rooted in presenting, I would say, an understanding of Allah Ta'ala as being loving and merciful and forgiving. And because I think we emphasize obligations a lot, and then we end up with young people that have no sense of what it actually means to love Allah Ta'ala or His Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So I think that being able to kind of reframe that language to where we are really emphasizing, again, not just, hey, young person, you better start praying right now, right? No, that this is what we as human beings do in our limited time on earth to express just a modicum of gratitude and love for Allah Ta'ala. I think that's very different than, hey, you got to do this just because, hey, you've reached a certain age, and if you don't do this, there's repercussions under the Sharia. That's what I'm saying here. I think the language is very important.
Absolutely. It's very nice. It's very nice, Sheikh. I think a lot of parents don't do that. They don't. The reason they don't do it is simply because maybe it was not presented this way. Meaning, and I think even for adult needs, not only for the teenagers, is that there is a relationship between us as human beings and our Creator. And if we have this relationship, we have to show how is this relationship. And for a teenager, you're going to say, well, you have a friend, how do you have a relationship with your friend? Well, you text her every day. Well, this is how it is. And you have to have a relationship with your Creator. So I love this, because there was a question, it's exactly in that, and I'm going to put the question on, what's the most useful way to deal with teens? Is it targhib or tarhib? Is it making them afraid or making them love what they do? And that's basically what you were saying, Ya Sheikha. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. So the last thing I heard, Sheikha, was the idea that the teen loves. In other words, and this is where the idea again of understanding where they are developmentally, and this is back to the hadith of the idea of that teen nash'a bi ibadatillah, that this is something that they see as being valuable and important, i.e. they look forward to this. This is something they love doing, that this is something that ideally, this is what we pray as parents, that young person, even when we're not standing over them, telling them what to do, that they are going to decide, for himself or herself, that this is what they want to do because it's the right thing to do, because they love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why I said, I think really focusing on what tawheed means from a very early age is so important. There's one other thing that I wanted to share, Sheikha. Again, I have a number of ahadith here about mercy and compassion. But, I wanted to mention, this particular ayah in Surah, this is chapter 40. So let me see here. Looks like we're kind of slowing down a little bit. Is this Surah Al-Ghafir? I believe it's Al-Ghafir, chapter 40. Bismillah ar-Rahman.
This one is Surah Luqman. Ya bunayya aqimi as-salata wa'mur bil ma'ruf wa nha 'anil munkar. That's Luqman.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted, there are two ayahs that I have here. Yes, I have this ayah right here from chapter 31. And then, I have this ayah here for chapter 40. And again, the reason why I want to emphasize this idea of looking at the textual sources and what did what does the Quran say about this? The Quran actually is acknowledging these different stages of development of the, of the human being. So let's take a look at this ayah, inshallah. You see the translation in front of you. I don't have the Arabic, but inshallah, obviously you can look it up, and I'm trying to put it up for you right now. But in this particular ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, it is He who created you of dust. Right, so Allah again, هو الذي خلقكم من تراب ثم من نطفة ثم من علقة ثم يخرجكم طفلا ثم لتبلغوا أشدكم. This is really interesting. So here Allah Ta'ala is enumerating all these stages. It's just so fascinating. So Allah reminding us, number one, of our very, very humble origins, that all of us are, how can we have any arrogance, right? All of us are created from turab, from dust. And then Allah Ta'ala then takes us from that stage of existence to what? To the nutfa, which is just the seed. It's the very beginning, the seed, the very kind of earliest stage of the human being, from that tiny microscopic nutfa to the alaqa, right, to that zygote that clings. And then Allah Ta'ala then brings us out as طفلة, right, as a young child. ثُمَّ لِتَبْلُغُوا أَشُدَّكُمْ. And thereafter, you're going to reach kind of like the peak of your strength and your understanding and your ability. ثُمَّ لِتَكُونُوا, this beautiful, ثُمَّ لِتَكُونُوا شُيُوخًا. And then after that, right, some of you, right, might attain old age. وَمِنْكُم مَّن يَتَوَفَّى. And then Allah is saying that, but some of you are taken before that. مِنْ قَبْلِ وَلِتَبْلُغُوا أَجَلًا مُسَمًّى. And then so that you might reach an appointed time. Again, وَلِتَبْلُغُوا أَجَلًا مُسَمًّى وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. I really love this ayah because there's so much we can learn from this one ayah. Again, the idea that all of us have a predetermined span of existence. Allah Ta'ala is acknowledging that some will, again, kind of reach that vitality of youth. Some will go through old age. Some will die early. Some will die later on. But for us to understand and emphasize to our children here, again, as they are forming their ideas about how to be in this world, that we only have a finite time in which to act, to worship Allah, in which to kind of affect any kind of positive change for ourselves or for those around us. And that's why I would say we need to be careful of the Western model, which is sometimes the Western model is very different from the Islamic one, in the sense that we find ourselves in a culture where sometimes people don't want to grow up, right? We see that a lot. People that are fully grown individuals and they've never really been able to grow up. So I want you to understand there is a lot of wisdom in looking at this Quranic model. In fact, there's a wonderful book called The Lives of Man. And it's by Sheikh Abdullah, Abdullah ibn Ali al-Haddad, I think is his name. I have to double check. It's in my office. But there's a book by a Yemeni scholar, I think of the early modern period. I think he was like 17th, 18th century. And he looks at the ayahs in the Quran and the ahadith, and he talks about stages of human development, from prehistory, from before conception, to the stages in the womb, to when the child is born. And, what he looks at is this idea of how long are we actually shab, or shabba, right? How long is that person actually a youth? It's really fascinating. And he's actually going to argue that per the Islamic tradition, that you have up until 40 to actually claim that status of being a youth. But then after that, that's when you're a mature individual. Of course, he gives the example of the Prophet ﷺ. When does revelation come down? That number 40 being very, very significant. So of course, he's not arguing that, all of us can be kids until we're 40, not at all. But this is a recognition by an earlier scholar that there are stages of development intellectually, cognitively, spiritually. So to emphasize to our teens, right? And this is where the conversations have to become a bit serious now, right? We don't know how much time that we have. And the reason why Islam treats that stage of adolescence with so much seriousness is because the purpose really behind, of the Sharia is to do what? Is to cultivate the human being to live up to his or her fullest potential. And we can't do that, obviously, if we ignore that stage of adolescence, right? So to understand, we have to treat it with a certain amount of balance here, right? They're not, that adolescent is not like the young child or the tifl or the tifla, but they're also not quite that mature adult. And how do we really kind of cultivate and bring the best during, honestly, years that are difficult? It can be difficult. Ask teens. They'll tell you it's not easy being that age. They go through a lot. And that's where the compassion piece is so important. I know we begin to wrap up. I want to, my message, dear Sheikha, for myself and our esteemed audience here, is look at Surah Luqman. So with Surah Luqman, I love the language because Sayyidina Luqman, and some say he might have been a prophet, some say he was a wise man, but Sayyidina Luqman, alayhi salam, that he is, I love the way that he speaks to his son. And again, if you look at the Quran, and there are so many positive models of parenting, whether it's Sayyidina Yaqub alayhi salam, which we'll look at more for our class, whether it's Sayyidina Luqman, look how he speaks to his son. Ya bunayya aqim as-salata wa'mur bil ma'ruf wanha 'anil munkar wasbir 'ala ma asabak inna dhalika min 'azmi al-umur. It's so beautiful how he speaks to his son. And by the way, right, what is he commanding his son to do? Establish prayer. Do what is right, forbid what is wrong, and be patient over what befalls you. Indeed, all that is of min azm al-umur, that is of the matters requiring determination. I mean, that's one translation, but if you think about it, inna dhalika min azm al-umur, what Sayyidina Luqman is doing in a very intentional way, in a very purposeful way, he is teaching him what he needs to get through life. And that's what we have to do as parents, and to be able to establish the foundation for that. Because like I said, if we wait till they're 15, 16, 17, and now we want to talk to them about this, I think that in some cases might be too late. Of course, there's always hope, but I'm just encouraging us to think about this. What does it mean to be min azm al-umur from when they're very small?
What I will add, if you allow me, Ya Sheikha, this is beautiful. And subhanAllah, we have been talking for 40 minutes. I just feel like we just started. If the parents themselves don't practice that, then it's going to be very difficult to give it to the children. Meaning, if I am as a mother or as a father or both, don't look at life like what you just explained in Surah Ghafir, predetermined time. I am here for a certain amount of time. I am not here only to make my career and work hard and make money. Rather, there's more than that. Then I can't tell this to my child. So this is the most important thing. We say this in Arabic, and you know this very well. فَقْدِ الشَّيْء لَا يُعْطِي. The person who doesn't have something can't give it to the others. So I cannot deliver the right message to my child, especially in this very difficult age. And by the way, and you said it beautifully, that age is very difficult because also of all the changes that's happening in the body, with all the hormonal changes, the physical changes. They grow up very quickly, they look different, and that's all a lot of changes on this one soul. So me as a parent, I need to understand that side, and I should have already practiced all this, and I went through this, so I have to be much more compassionate, and then I have to look at life very different. And I think this is where the problem comes in, because parents are very busy with their other children or their career and whatever, and then when it comes to this, we expect them to do it right away. It doesn't work this way. It needs, this ayah of Luqman actually needs to go to the parents and to the adults first before the children also. But I agree with you. Ya bunay, it's one of and all the scholars talks about how Sayyidina Luqman spoke to his son. And it's in the not Ya bunay, it's my child. It's the lovely young child close to me. It's hard to translate this in English. It's Ya bunay. And the same thing when Sayyidina Ibrahim talked to his father. Ya abati, my dear beautiful father. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy. It is not easy whatsoever. It's very challenging. It's getting more challenging to all of us, actually, living in this with all these changes. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what we are going through, and He subhanahu wa ta'ala the only one who can makes it easy. We still have some time, ya Shaykha, about 7 minutes. What do you want to share with us for about 7 minutes, inshallah?
Alhamdulillah, I completely agree with what you're saying. The parents, and this is, this is again this idea of كلكم راع, the idea that all of you are وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته, that all of you are responsible for their flock. I mean, that's where, again, much of this work that we're doing is really on ourselves as parents, because you're absolutely right. We can't give something that we don't have. And to that question of prayer, Sheikha, if we have to drag them kicking and screaming, to the prayer mat, I would say that it means that maybe something we weren't quite able to impart and teach them the prayer. Maybe it was something about the way we prayed. Perhaps we weren't able to kind of demonstrate that love and that's the thing, if they see that we are reluctant or always late or always missing the prayer, or, oh, it's just another thing on my to-do list. So a lot, there is so much that they're going to take from us, and not just directly from our example, Sheikha, but indirectly they can take, because we can tell them all day long, prayer is good and prayer is wonderful and prayer is fuddled, and but if
we're losing you, ya Sheikha.
Jama'ah, are we still there? That's why the prayer in Jama'ah and congregation is so important, making sure that we establish that from an early age, because honestly, if the kids don't see that, it's hard to get them to, it's hard to inculcate that kind of love of congregational prayer. And then they're just going to see the prayer as kind of like a sort of a solitary exercise. So that's what I would say. Back to the question of, what do we do if we have that teen that just doesn't want to pray? Again, a lot of it is about what we're doing when they're really little. I did want to leave everybody with this thought, Sheikha, that, and this is from the National Institute of Mental Health, by the way, because I understand their audience. There's only one physician here. It's Sheikha, it's not me. Whatever information I am sharing with you, I'm trying to share that information from experts. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, and I'll share this with our class later on, there are 7 things we need to know about the teen brain. So one is that the brain reaches its biggest size in early adolescence. The brain continues to mature after it is done growing. The teen brain is ready to learn and adapt. So don't ever give up on your teen, no matter how, recalcitrant they're being. Many mental disorders, by the way, and I'm going to share more data. The Family and Youth Institute, mashallah, has done a lot of work around mental health in youth, and I want to share some of that. Many mental disorders may begin to appear during adolescence, and honestly, thinking about my own adolescence, I can look back and think about things where I say now, well, subhanallah, I could kind of see where maybe I was struggling, and just kind of being aware of that and having support, right? Teen brains may be more vulnerable to stress, and I can't overstate that, especially during COVID, subhanallah. Teens need more sleep than children and adults, and the teen brain is resilient. All right. So that's 7 things. This is the National Institute of Mental Health. 7 things to know about the teenage brain. All right.
Yeah, this is really interesting, subhanallah, because the more we know as a human being, the more we see things different. And especially this day and age, the day of just do it and just because is gone. Now we have to make them understand. We have to understand. And the more we understand about it, I love these 7 points, and I'm sure you're going to talk about it more in the course. But the more we understand about what is happening with the person in front of me, my way will change. I will be more compassionate. I may change my tactics. And one thing that we all have to remember, that the end result is in Allah's hand. He's not going to ask me about the end result or ask us about the end result, because the end result, it's in his hand. He is going to ask me about what effort I did. What did I do as a parent, as an adult, to learn myself, to practice myself, and to impart this on my children? And then the result, you may have done everything, and then the child still did not do it. And the best example is Sayyidina Nuh. I mean, he's a Nabi, and his son did not believe. But the whole idea is that
Yes, absolutely, Sheikha. And I think there was a question from one of the audience members about what if you do lead by example and they still don't follow that example? Again, as Sheikha said, the outcome is always with Allah Ta'ala. I do have some thoughts surrounding what to do if you have a young person that's dependent upon your support and largesse and they're still not cooperating. I think there are things that you can do. And I'd like to look into that and show a little bit further for our parenting class. But what I will say is that one of the things I really appreciate is that my parents made it very clear. Well, they had different styles, but my mother was quite strict. May Allah preserve her. And one of the things I really appreciate looking back is that she did, it was almost this idea that there's a contract in a sense that so long as this is the idea of kind of making that young person understand there's a moral kind of obligation. Even if you think you don't have any legal obligations, even if you think that you should just sit back and not pray or not fast, that there is a moral obligation. And that moral obligation means that so long as you, young person, are comfortably ensconced in the home of your parents, and dependent upon your parents, for your livelihood and your sustenance and what have you, that, when it comes to carrying out certain things, even if you don't get why you should do this, then you really should be doing what your parents are asking, so long as it does not go against what Allah Ta'ala has commanded. But at the same time, understand, where you have some young people that are very cooperative, you're going to have other young people who are not. They're going to push back. They're going to be defiant. And that's where the idea of counseling comes in, mentors, youth directors, it definitely, obviously supportive family members. It can't be to where, ideally, where the obligation is solely on the shoulders of that parent to ensure that that young person is doing what they should be doing. And understand, they will stop doing things. They might, God forbid, they might stray off of that path for a time, but I've seen examples where they have come back. But sometimes it takes a while. And usually the best way to address it is with patience and prayer, as opposed to, at the point of well, I'm going to discipline you, because that discipline might work when they're young, but once they get older, we have to have a different model of parenting.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Zayn. This was beautiful. Very quickly, subhanAllah, it's an hour already. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our children, our youth, and our adults. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower us with His rahmah, with His teaches us patience. It's not easy. It's easy to say, much harder to do. Teach us patience. Help us to be patient. Help us to see what they are seeing. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Zaynab. I personally ask and invite all of you to join us. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful, it's a 4-week course. It's 1 hour a week, but it has a lot of information, alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair ya Sheikh Zaynab. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabi tasliman kathira.
Jazakumullah khaira. Ameen. Thank you, Sheikh. I really enjoyed our